A wild Mustang trapped in a raging flood fighting for his life. For hours he struggled against the relentless current, his body battered, his strength fading. No one thought he would make it, but then against all odds someone appeared. What happened next will leave you speechless. This is a story of survival, courage, and a bond that no one saw coming. The first raindrops had started out falling surely earlier than sundown, light in the starting, barely greater than a drizzle. But within an hour, the skies had opened, unleashing an unrelenting torrent of water upon the valley. By midnight, the river had swollen past its banks. The as soon as dry plains had transformed right into a raging sea of muddy, merciless water, swallowing bushes, fences, and something in its course. And in the middle of it, on my own, a wild Mustang had become fighting for his life. Storm had been roaming unfastened in this land for years. He had outrun cowboys, escaped pens, and conquered droughts. He changed into wild, untouchable, a survivor. But he had never faced whatever like this. The flood had caught him off protect. He had been grazing close to the river even as the floor below him vanished. The surprising stress of the water had ripped him from solid floor, dragging him downstream before he may need to react. Now, he emerged as preventing against the full fury of nature itself. His hooves kicked desperately, but the modern have become too robust. Each time he attempted to advantage footing, the water pulled him deeper. Branches, tree trunks, and particles crashed beyond him, a few hitting his frame with brutal strain. His effective muscle businesses burned. His lungs screamed for air. But he refused to surrender. For hours he fought. The cold seeped into his bones. His actions slowed. His head barely stayed above the churning floor. The weight of exhaustion dragged him down. Then, a large trunk came barreling in the direction of him. Storm barely noticed it in time. He attempted to move, but his frame wasn't rapid sufficient anymore. The log slammed into his element, spinning him violently. His legs went numb. His breath ripped from his chest. For the primary time in his life, he felt powerless. He became going underneath. Daniel Carter gripped the steering wheel of his truck, staring through the heavy rain pounding in opposition to the windshield. He had visible masses of storms earlier then, however not like this. The complete valley changed into underwater. Rivers had swallowed roads. Ranches had have become islands. Cattle and horses had been misplaced. The radio crackled beside him. The roads are flooded. If you're nevertheless obtainable, get to high ground, the sheriff's voice warned. Daniel didn't respond. He just sat there, jaw clenched, watching the dark, chaotic floodwaters rage outside. He had spent maximum of his existence going for walks into risk, first as a soldier, then as a firefighter. He had saved lives, pulled humans out of burning buildings, carried kids from the wreckage of automobile crashes. And years in the past, he had paid the charge. Now, all he preferred come to be silence. No extra rescues. No extra losing everyone. But then, something moved within the water. At first, he conceived it became a fallen branch. But then it struggled. His pulse jumped. It modified right into a horse, a black Mustang, slightly preserving its head above the water. The animal kicked closer to the contemporary, preventing for lifestyles. However, Daniel could see it changed into losing. Damn it. Daniel exhaled, squeezing his eyes close. He informed himself to appearance away. He advised himself it wasn't his hassle. Then the Mustang's head went beneath, and Daniel threw the truck into equipment. Daniel slightly felt the truck skid as he slammed the accelerator, tires slicing through the flooded road. His wipers fought against the rain, however the global out-of-doors became despite the fact that a blurry mess of darkness and water. This is a mistake, a voice screamed at him, reminding him why he had sworn by no means to do this once more. But his hands stayed tight on the wheel, his jaw locked. Through the sheets of rain, he observed it once more, the suffering black shape barely staying above the water. The Mustang changed into losing the combat. Daniel's truck roared via the floodwaters, headlights flashing in the course of the destruction. The river had swallowed the valley, turning the as soon as acquainted dirt roads right into a raging modern day. Fence posts floated like twigs. Dead branches swirled in whirlpools. And inside the center of it all, Storm, the Mustang's head, bobbed barely visible in the chaos. His legs kicked weakly. His strength almost long beyond. One wrong go with the flow, and he'd be out of place. Daniel's heart pounded. He had to act now. He slammed the truck into park, wrenched the door open, and stepped into the freezing floodwaters. The marvel hit him immediately. The modern day come to be sturdy, too robust. His boots slipped in competition to the submerged floor as the water reached his waist, icy and unforgiving. He braced himself, gripping the door for balance. Storm's head went under another time. Daniel lunged ahead. The Mustang surfaced with a desperate chuckle, his widespread eyes full of panic. His body modified into included in cuts from the debris, his black coat slick with water. Daniel took some other step, the current pulling at him like claws. He had to get closer. "Come on, infant," he muttered, forcing himself beforehand. "Just a little longer." Storm's ears flicked, however his body changed into shutting down. Daniel pushed ahead, his boots dragging over submerged particles. A broken fence placed up slammed into his element, however he barely felt it. Nothing else mattered. Storm's eyes locked onto his. Daniel didn't anticipate. He reached. His hands brushed wet fur, then the Mustang thrashed. A surprising surge of panic. A very last burst of survival. Storm kicked out hard. His hooves slammed into Daniel's ribs. Pain exploded through his chest. The effect sent him stumbling backward, the modern day snatching him off his feet. The freezing flood swallowed him entire. Darkness. Cold. Silence. Daniel's international spun. Up have grow to be down. His lungs screamed for air because the water dragged him deeper, twisting him like a rag doll. His arms clawed in opposition to the modern, but there was nothing to seize. A voice deep in his thoughts whispered, "This is the manner it ends." But something else, something more potent, replied again. Not however. Summoning every ounce of electricity, Daniel kicked difficult, preventing the burden of the water. His hand shot in advance and closed round something robust, a rope. A goddamn fence rope. He grabbed it with all he had, his frame jerking to a stop due to the fact the cutting-edge day tried to rip him away. His head broke the floor. Freezing air. Coughing. Gasping. He looked up. Storm modified into though there. Barely. The Mustang's legs had stopped kicking. His body turned into sinking. Daniel became out of time. Ignoring the ache, ignoring everything, he pushed ahead yet again. This time, Storm didn't combat. His hand grasped the pony's soaked mane as he reached below, wrapping his arm throughout the Mustang's powerful neck. "Not these days," Daniel growled. "You're not loss of life today." With the remaining of his power, he started out pulling. Daniel's grip on Storm's waterlogged mane became slipping. His arms screamed from the effort, his frame barely retaining both of them above the raging flood. The Mustang's weight became dead closer to him, too heavy, too exhausted. And the modern day wasn't slowing. Each second dragged them farther away, deeper into the flood region, away from strong floor. The river had transformed the valley right into a chaotic, swirling nightmare of debris, broken fences, uprooted timber. Storm's eyes were half of closed, his chest growing and falling in gradual, worked breaths. He changed into shutting down. Daniel clenched his jaw. Not taking vicinity. Not these days. Gritting his teeth, he adjusted his grip, securing his arms spherical Storm's neck. The Mustang didn't withstand. He became beyond preventing, beyond worry. His body became spent. The most effective factor keeping him alive now turned out to be Daniel. And Daniel wasn't approximately to permit go. Using each ounce of energy he had left, he kicked difficult, attempting to persuade them closer to a cluster of trees jutting out of the water ahead. It changed into their only shot. His muscle businesses screamed. His ribs throbbed from the kick Storm had landed earlier. But he pushed in advance. One stroke, then another. The freezing water attempted to thieve his breath, however he saved his cognizance locked at the in part submerged very well tree beforehand. It turned out to be 10 feet away. Storm's frame sagged heavier in opposition to him. 5 feet Daniel's vision blurred. His grip became failing. his energy modified into jogging out. 3 feet. A massive wave surged ahead, dragging them sideways. The tree changed into slipping away. 1 foot. With a totally remaining, decided lunge, Daniel threw out his hand and caught the lowest department. Pain shot through his shoulder because the weight of storm and the pressure of the contemporary threatened to rip him away. But he held on, grimacing. He wrapped his arm tighter throughout the Mustang's neck, the use of his unfastened hand to haul them closer. The the front hooves hit strong bark. A susceptible sound escaped Storm's throat, a breath. A flicker of existence. Daniel didn't prevent. He fought in opposition to the freezing water, pushing Storm up, forcing him onto the submerged roots. The Mustang collapsed towards the bottom of the tree, chest heaving. Daniel accompanied, slamming his returned in competition to the bark, gasping for air. For the primary time in hours, they weren't drowning. The worldwide spun round him. His palms ached. His entire frame trembled from exhaustion. His ribs throbbed in which Storm had kicked him. But they had been alive. Storm let out a vulnerable, trembling breath, his ears flicking slightly, however his frame didn't skip. He became truly tired. Daniel reached out, jogging a give up the Mustang's slick, shivering frame. Hang in there, friend. The flood nonetheless raged around them, the hurricane unrelenting. The water became growing. But for now, they'd a 2D. They had survived. For now. But Daniel knew the reality. If he didn't discover a way to get Storm to dry land speedy, the Mustang wouldn't make it. And neither might he. Daniel's complete frame ached. His limbs had been numb from the freezing water, his muscle tissues stiff from exhaustion. Every breath felt like hearth in his chest. But he didn't have time to don't forget ache. The flood had become nonetheless developing. Storm lay collapsed in competition to the bottom of the oak tree, his elements rising and falling with shallow, susceptible breaths. His soaked black coat clung to his body, revealing sharp ribs underneath. He became jogging out of time. Daniel ran a shaking quit the Mustang's shoulder. "Come on, big man," he muttered, voice hoarse. "You're not loss of life right here." Storm's ears flicked barely, however his frame didn't float. Too prone. Too bloodless. Daniel glanced spherical, searching to analyze their situation. The floodwaters stretched in every direction, swallowing the whole lot. Fences, barns, complete pastures. Gone. There was no avenue. No breakout. He swallowed. The best risk they had was a distant patch of land barely visible above the waterline. A small upward push inside the valley wherein the ground hadn't been absolutely overtaken. But it turned into at the least a quarter-mile away. And Storm couldn't swim that an extended way. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing his thoughts to cognizance. The tree had become stable, its trunk thick and sturdy in spite of the flood. A few branches stretched outward, clearly high sufficient to maintain from being swallowed through the growing water. He turned his gaze to an extended piece of barbed cord fencing tangled across the trunk, half of submerged. An idea formed right away. It was insane. But madness turned into all he had left. He grabbed the fencing, ignoring the brink of sharp steel slicing into his hands, and started out twisting the free wires together, growing a crude but sturdy lead. Storm modified into too vulnerable to move on his very own, but Daniel could pull him. If he ought to tie the makeshift bring-about Storm, steady it spherical his neck and chest, he might also need to guide him via the floodwaters closer to protection. Assuming, of direction, that neither of them drowned first. "This is the dumbest trouble I've ever executed," he muttered beneath his breath. Storm let loose an inclined giggle, nearly like a response. It changed into faint, but it grew to be a few element. Daniel tightened his grip. "Yeah, properly," he rasped, "in case you don't combat, none of this subjects?" Storm's ears flicked once more. Daniel took that as a sign to preserve going. He moved brief, walking the wire right into a organization however secure harness around the Mustang's chest. It wasn't perfect, however it would hold. When he became wonderful the lead became tight however no longer choking. Daniel pressed a hand in opposition to the horse's damp coat. "A huge guy. Time to rise up." Storm didn't circulate. Daniel exhaled sharply, bracing himself. He couldn't wait. With a deep breath, he grabbed the lead and pulled. The Mustang's muscle groups twitched. His legs shifted barely. "Come on," Daniel entreated, voice uncooked from exhaustion. "I recognize you were given fight left." Storm's respiration quickened. The front legs trembled, then driven. Daniel pulled more hard. Storm grunted, his frame lifting an inch. Then each other. Daniel's palms screamed, his muscle tissues burning from stress, however he saved pulling. And then, Storm's legs locked. With one remaining burst of strength, the Mustang shoved himself upright. He staggered, aspects heaving, however he became standing. Daniel set free a breath of natural remedy. For the number one time because the flood commenced, that they'd a actual danger. But now came the toughest element. Could they survive the very last stretch? Storm become reputation, however slightly. His legs trembled. His breathing changed into shallow. His head hung low, exhaustion threatening to pull him go into reverse. Daniel tightened his grip at the makeshift lead, his personal frame shaking from cold and exhaustion. He must experience the load of the Mustang in opposition to him. If Storm collapsed again, there wouldn't be a 2D chance. The floodwaters stretched beforehand, dark and unpredictable. Between them and protection modified into nearly a quarter-mile of raging water. And if they didn't flow now, they wouldn't make it. Daniel's fingers burned towards the twisted wire lead as he braced himself in opposition to the modern-day day. He took one deep breath, then pulled. Storm didn't pass. Daniel grit his enamel. "Come on." "Large man. I didn't drag your ass out of the river just to let you die right here." Storm flicked an ear, but his legs remained frozen. Daniel pulled once more, extra tough. The wire reduced deeper into his palms. Storm set free a weak grunt, his hooves shifting barely within the dust. "That's it," Daniel muttered. "One step at a time." The Mustang took every other hesitant step. Then any other. His legs shaky however decided. Daniel moved with him, guiding him ahead. Each step a struggle towards the current. The floodwaters surged around them, bloodless and constant. Every few seconds, debris rushed beyond, broken fences, floating logs, even a drowned calf. Storm flinched on the wreckage, his frame tensing underneath Daniel's grip. "It's simply water," Daniel stated, his voice strained. "Ignore it. Keep moving." Storm hesitated, then obeyed. The water grew deeper, rising past Daniel's waist. His boots struggled for traction at the uneven floor below. Storm stumbled, his legs nearly giving out. Daniel yanked at the lead, maintaining him upright. "Don't prevent," he barked. "Keep going." Storm snorted, ears pinning again. Another few steps. Then some different. They were halfway. Daniel's legs burned. His arms felt like lead, the muscle tissues screaming from try. He had spent the whole lot he had dragging this horse out of the river. He modified into running on empty. But then he noticed it. The land, a small, half-submerged patch of dry earth slightly big sufficient for every of them to face on. It changed into so close. But among them in safety, the cutting edge end up at its maximum powerful. A deep, powerful undertow ripped through the water, dragging particles into its swirling depths. One incorrect step, and they'd be long past. Daniel grew to become to Storm. The Mustang's legs were shaking violently. His body changed into soaking moist. His head low. But his eyes nonetheless held hearth. Daniel clenched his jaw. "You were given one extra push in you, don't you?" Storm set free a hard breath. Daniel tightened his grip. And then they ran. Daniel gritted his tooth and pulled. The water roared around them, stronger than before. Each leap forward changed into a battle against the modern day, in the direction of exhaustion, in competition to fear. Storm stumbled. Daniel yanked hard on the lead, preserving the Mustang from taking place. If he fell now, it'd come to be over. The river's very last stretch turned out to be a vortex of destruction. Uprooted bushes twisted inside the water, forming risky obstacles. The undertow sucked at their legs, dragging them sideways. Daniel planted his FT, refusing to be taken. "Move, Storm," he shouted over the noise. The Mustang snorted, eyes wild. His muscle groups trembled, however he pushed ahead. Another step. Then a few other. Daniel felt his very own legs going numb. His boots were useless. The ground underneath him become gone. Then, disaster. A massive wave of floodwater surged towards them, wearing a floating tree trunk the dimensions of an automobile. Daniel's pulse spiked. They wouldn't live to tell the story a success. He reacted proper away, yanking Storm sideways simply as the log slammed into the water beside them, sending a wave of freezing mud over their heads. Storm screamed. The Mustang reared up, kicking wildly, breaking unfastened from Daniel's grip. No! Storm out of place his footing. His body flipped backward, headfirst into the cutting edge. Daniel lunged, his hands greedy at thin air. The Mustang vanished below the surface. Daniel's breath ripped from his chest. Not like this. Without hesitation, he dove after him. The water swallowed him whole. Darkness. Silence. Cold. Daniel's frame rolled violently, trapped within the river's grip. He compelled his eyes open. Searching. Then, a shadow. Storm, sinking. Daniel kicked tough, conducting out. His fingers brushed wet fur. He grabbed hold. The Mustang twitched, his body limp. Daniel wrapped his hands around the horse's neck, preventing to drag them each up. The floor became too a long way. His lungs burned. His vision blurred. A very last, decided kick, and that they broke through. Daniel gasped for air, dragging Storm's head above water. The Mustang wasn't transferring. Daniel's heart pounded. No. Using the final of his electricity, he hauled Storm within the direction of the land. The shore was clearly ft away. One closing pull. They hit solid ground. Daniel collapsed, dragging.